So whenever you start saving for retirement, halve your age. So if you start when you're 30, half of that's 15. That's the percentage of your income you should be putting in the pension.
Tom McPhail is our favourite pension expert. He works for finance consultancy firm The Landcat and is former head of policy at Hargreaves Lansdown.
The cohorts of the population who are least well served are not the lowest paid, and it's not the highest paid.
That simple decision alone, no more money, could double the amount that you end up with.
Absolutely.
You guys are both pension experts and finance experts.
I like the air quotes there.
The air quotes for Jamie.
Expert. Yeah.
That's what it is. They talk a good game.
That's a big game. The last episode that we did together was about pensions, but it was more high level. It was kind of the system and the structures that exist. But today we want to get into more practical steps really around those systems so that people listening can make this year the year that they really get to grips with their pensions. We'll link the other episode as part A of this at the end. But let's start first of all with a hard question to answer, if you don't mind. How do people work out how much they need in their pension and how much they should be saving?
Okay, I think that's a really good place to start. I think the best answer to that question is to use an online calculator, of which there are many available. The Money and Pension Service have one, for example. And in a few minutes, you can plug in your current salary, your current income, how old you are, maybe how much you're saving at the moment, because most people are saving something for retirement, when you want to retire, and out the bottom will pop a little number that says you should be saving this much, or you're currently on course to have this much money in retirement. And the important thing to remember with that is there are loads of assumptions in there and they'll all be wrong, right? So inflation, investment returns, I mean, maybe arguably you can get the charges right because it's a known quantity, but they'll vary over time because you'll change jobs. Your income will go up and down. Your health will change. So when you actually start drawing on your pension, it's really difficult to predict up front. But it will give you a number, and it won't be a bad number. It'll be a really good starting point. So I would encourage, if you're going to do one thing, if you're sitting here thinking, I'm in a pension or I'm thinking of starting a pension and I don't know how much to save, that's a really good way to spend 10 minutes. It's not a big imposition. It's really useful time. And actually what I'd also encourage people to do is to come back and do that regularly, because your circumstances change. So your income changes, or you get into a relationship, or you have kids, or your health changes. Stuff changes over time. So it's quite a good discipline to keep coming back and revisiting that over time. You need to look at the assumptions the calculator is making. So when it says you're going to have a pot of £1 million, has that taken account of inflation or not? Because or are the assumptions around the investment returns, are those real returns or inflation adjusted returns? So I think that's a really good thing to do. There are other ones. I love one that's just a really nice rule of thumb. Do you know about the half your age thing? Have you come across that one? So whenever you start saving for retirement, halve your age. So if you start when you're 30, half of that's 15. That's the percentage of your income you should be putting in a pension. Now that's pretty crude, but it's not wildly inaccurate as well. It produces quite a high, scary number. It illustrates how important it is, if you can, to be in a workplace pension for those who are lucky enough to have an employer, because that employer contribution makes a massive difference to the equation. As another rule of thumb, I'd say just broadly, if you're saving less than 10% of your income, you're probably not saving enough, right? So the most accurate way to get an answer to that question is to go and use an online calculator.
So these numbers, I can already hear people going 15% at 30 or 20% at 40. These are big numbers, right? Yes. First of all, are you talking total retirement savings, not just money into a pension? So what I mean by that is people might have an ISA or other kind of...
I agree with that. So I would say that's total long-term savings. ISA's fine. I mean, we can talk about the different ways you can save for retirement. And I think, a pension is a really effective way to do it because of the tax breaks. And I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but the fact that the money is locked away, right? So it doesn't get used for something else. Now, that can be problematic at times if you hit a financial crisis and you need money and it's in your pension and you can't get at it. And I think particularly if you're self-employed, we'll talk about self-employed and what's happened to retirement savings there. But I think that's one of the reasons why self-employed saving has collapsed in the last 10, 20 years. So the value of it being in a pension is the money is locked away, but the drawback is the money is locked away. in answer to your question, yeah, fine. If you want to use ISAs as part of your long-term retirement savings strategy, and there are good reasons to do that, ISAs are super flexible. The money you take out is just tax-free. There's no tax problems with taking the money out of an ISA further down the line, or indeed a lifetime ISA. So that's an advantage, and there are reasons. So you might want to do that maybe alongside a pension. You might want to invest in property. There's lots of other things you can do. You might build up a business and say, that's my retirement savings plan. So I don't think it just has to be a pension. But whatever you do, you need to be doing something. And I think those numbers we talked about, look at that as what your overall kind of retirement savings strategy should look like.
Yeah, you're earmarking X amount, 10%, 15% of your gross income or net income?
Gross income, ideally, yes.
Gross income towards something, a pot for the future, for retirement. Okay, correct. Perfect. So just to confirm, these percentages we're talking about, they include the employer's contributions?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not asking you to put in 10% of your salary and then get your employer on top. And it's great if they do. But yeah, think about your overall savings rate in the context of what, between me and my employer, what's the total going into my retirement savings?
What we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the major pensions that people have available to them and show people how to get the most out of them. The notes tell me to start with the workplace pension, but I want to start with state pension because I make the rules. No, but I want to start with the state pension because before I did lots of research on this, my view was always, I'm not going to have a state pension. It will have disappeared by then. But then I read all of the DWP papers around the creation of auto-enrollment. And when they brought that in, and everything is basically on the basis of an 8% contribution through auto-enrollment plus state pension, we think people will get here. It seems that our system assumes that everyone will have a state pension of some sort long term.
Yeah, because the risk is if you pull back the curtain and say, well, maybe you won't get a state pension, then everything cascades away from that. So within those modelling assumptions, the civil servants would have been told, assume everyone's going to get their state pension. Because if you don't assume that, then we just open this can of worms, right? And we don't want
Ponzi dies.
Right, the Ponzi dies. We don't want to address that. So they would have baked into their assumptions, yes, everybody's going to get their state pension. And I've always been pretty comfortable that the sustainability of the state pension can be adjusted over time by things like we currently have the triple lock, and that means that it's being very generously inflation proofed over time. Well, we could always switch that off, or we could adjust the age at which people get their state pension. So a couple of things there. One is because of the demographics, and we talked about the demographics last time I was here, that's getting increasingly problematic. The fact the fertility rate keeps going down. Every year, look, we're making fewer babies, and we can to some extent plug the gap with immigration. But there are issues with all of that. And the Ponzi scheme only works if you've got a reasonably stable population. And what we have now is all the baby boomers and the Gen X moving towards retirement, and smaller cohorts of the population coming through underneath. And so the taxpayers of tomorrow have to sustain an ever-increasing burden of retired people in the future. So that's a problem. So I'm less confident today about the sustainability of the state pension than I have been in the past. I think there will always be a state pension, but you guys, you youngsters sitting across the table from me, you might not get it until you're in your 70s, right? So things may have to shift. And I think that's a conversation that keeps getting kicked down the road. The state pension is massively expensive. After the NHS, it's right up there. It's £125 billion a year, that order of government expenditure. And it's getting more and more expensive all the time because of the ageing of the population. So yes, there's this assumption you're going to get a state pension. And for now, we'll just maintain this polite fiction, almost this assumption that the state pension is still going to be there. I do worry about the sustainability of it in the long term.
The problem is, though, it's a big amount of money in terms of the total retirement pot. So if I want 40k a year in income, or 33, let's say, the state pension gets me a third of that.
Yes.
And that means that when I run my calculations, because if we're saying to someone they need to save 20% of their gross income, and there's an assumption of a state pension, they are saving towards that through national insurance contributions or, tax.
Yes.
They're paying a tax burden on the basis that if I pay their pension today, someone will pay mine in the future. And if that promise is broken, you're basically saying to people they need to find another third of their savings. So how do me and T sit here and plan around that?
So for now, you just kind of have to assume it will be there broadly. And this is why I made the point the assumptions will be wrong. This is another of the assumptions assumptions that will be wrong. So the nature of the state pension will evolve in the decades to come between your age now and when you get to retirement. That's going to happen. It might be that you get it later. It might become less generous through sort of an adjustment to the inflation proofing. There may be an element of means testing, possibly, though that doesn't actually save a huge amount of money. So if you guys are super successful in your business and you're millionaires, well, maybe the government in the future will come along and say, we're going to give you a bit less of the state pension, or we'll tax you more to offset that. So things will change. But at the moment, more than half the retired population relies on the state pension for more than half their retirement income, right? So it's a hugely important pillar of people's retirement incomes. You can't just whip that away overnight. So things will change, but they'll change slowly. You can't just come in with a truck and...
You said that the age might get pushed up to 70 for when you get your state pension. Can most people work till 70? I mean, obviously we could, like, just sitting here talking, but like the average job.
Speak for yourself, mate. I'm thinking that already.
I'm losing my voice already, to be fair.
I think you said 75 as well. Yeah, I think 70 is the foregone conclusion.
So then you fundamentally change the nature of what the purpose of the state pension is, and you say, right, it's there as a backstop, but as you say, most people are going to want to stop working before then. Okay, well, you need to save money then.
It makes sure that you don't die poor, basically. It's like it comes in at the end of life, maybe to provide care or something.
Right. So, or you could say, look, let's say you want to stop working at 65, that's probably a reasonable number most people would aim for. Maybe you target to draw your private savings, your retirement savings, at an accelerated rate between 65 and 75. And then at that point, the state pension kicks in, and it doesn't matter that you've depleted your private savings, because at that point, a more generous state pension kicks in at a higher level from age 75 onwards. That's one example of how things could change in the future. But all we can do today is work on the assumption that currently the state pension is £11,500 a year, going up to £12,000 a year next year. Work on the assumption that that's what you're going to get. Because, as I said, I think if they make changes, it'll be subtle and slow adjustments over time to allow people to adapt their plans to that new changed rules. Another aspect of it to bear in mind is when you're thinking about your retirement savings, there's this concept called target replacement rate, right? If you're on 100 grand a year before retirement, then that state pension of £11,500 a year, it's a relatively small slice of your pre-retirement income. If you're on 25 grand a year, from the next tax year when it goes up to £12,000 a year, that's nearly 50% of your pre-retirement income. So the role that the state pension plays in your retirement provision does depend hugely on the standard of living you're enjoying before retirement. And interestingly, the cohorts of the population who are least well served in terms of retirement savings at the moment are not the lowest paid, and it's not the highest paid. It's the people in the middle, around £50,000, £60,000 a year at the moment. They're the ones for whom the state pension will be a relatively small portion of their pre-retirement income, who are perhaps typically only on the auto-enrollment default savings rate, enough. And they're not saving enough.
They're not getting the replacement.
Correct. Yeah. So they're the ones facing the biggest drop in their standard of living as they transition from work into retirement.
I did, I looked at the importance of state pension, and to all cohorts, even the wealthiest, and wealthy is very broad. They're basically saying the top 20%, and obviously a billionaire doesn't probably care about it, but it's an important income for everyone.
Yes.
Especially as a couple, because you're talking 22 grand in a house or whatever.
And it's a guaranteed income. That's the other aspect of it. You don't have to worry about investment risk. You don't have to worry about longevity risk. It will just get paid for the rest of your life, and that's hugely valuable. And if you try to price up replacing that with a similar guaranteed inflation-proofed income for the rest of your life, it ain't cheap.
Like an annuity.
Correct.
How much would an annuity be, do you think, roughly?
So that kind of annuity, the yield would probably be around 3.5%. I mean...
Sorry. What's an annuity for those,
those
who don't know?
It's where you I love annuities. I think they're a really efficient financial mechanism, right? You hand your money over to an insurance company, and the good news is you can then get this guaranteed income for the rest of your life. You don't have to worry about where it's invested. You don't have to worry about how long you live for. They just keep paying you that income for the rest of your life, and that's why it's like the state pension. The bad news with the annuity is the reason they can give you a decent rate of return on that and give you that guarantee is because when you die, you don't typically typically you don't get any capital back. They use the capital. If you die young, they say, right, well, we'll use that money to subsidize and support the income we're paying to the people who live to 105, right? So it's a very efficient way of allocating the capital to the people who need it most, i.e. the ones who live a long time. So that's what an annuity does. And as a way of using the money efficiently, I think it's brilliant. But the downside is you never see the money again.
But they become more attractive because of higher interest rates.
They become more attractive through higher interest rates, that's right. And maybe we'll come on to some of the budget changes that we saw recently and the change to the death benefit rules under drawdown plans. I think annuities are about to become more popular again.
Yeah. Is it possible to, I'm speaking for myself here, to take a part of your retirement cash and buy an annuity to get yourself that guaranteed income, but still have portions of that are invested in the stock market?
Absolutely. It's not an all or nothing. So you could take your £100,000 retirement pot and use half it to buy an annuity and stick half into the stock market. And
it was all or nothing in the past, wasn't it? They were forced you to buy an annuity.
Pre-2015, you didn't have to buy an annuity, but the rules were pretty restrictive, so most people did. Mm-hmm. And at a stroke, George Osborne changed the rules and said, no one needs to buy an annuity now. I'm going to be really generous in how you can draw your money.
You can buy car parking spaces in Dubai.
You can do all that. You can buy a Lamborghini to stick in the car parking spaces in Dubai.
Yeah.
So then demand for annuities collapsed. And I think some of the recent budget changes are probably going to push demand for annuities back up again.
Is there a minimum for an annuity? Or is it?
No, probably 10,000.
But you're not going to get much income for that.
You're not going to get much income from that.
Okay, so let's go into the different pension types now and getting the most out of them. And what a lot of the conversation always focuses on, pay more in. And I think that's a scary message for people. So we want to also look at the levers that we can pull that can produce better returns or get people more money without necessarily paying more in. And we're going to start with the workplace pensions. So most people will be in a work-based scheme listening to this, I would assume, through auto-enrollment. Can you just give us some high-level kind of overviews for people listening who think I'm in this thing and I don't really know what it is?
So the great thing about auto-enrollment is you don't have to do anything. You just get put in a pension when you start a job. If you're over the age of 22, then there's very often a waiting period of 3 months, but then your employer is obliged by law just to put you in a pension and start taking money out of your pay packet and putting his own money into the pension for you as well. So he'll put in 3% of your pay, gross pay. You'll put in 4% of your gross pay, and then the government will top it up with tax relief as well. So if you're a basic rate taxpayer, that's another 1%. So the default savings rate is 8% of your income. An important point to note here, without getting too far into the weeds on the technical details, the minimum that the employer can do is 3% of your pay and 4% of your pay based on a band of your earnings that ignores the first £6,000 of your income, qualifying earnings, right? So if you're a relatively low paid person on, say, £20,000 a year, that's £6,000 of your income that's getting ignored for pension savings purposes. So you're actually only paying in 8% of £14,000 a year, which means as a percentage of your overall income, you're probably only paying about 6% of your income into a pension. So that's just one thing to be aware of.
It's also for the higher earners. It's not their whole salary. So you only get an 8% of like that band.
So if you earn 50,000, exactly. So many employers are more generous and they'll say, we'll do the calculation on 100% of your income, or we'll cap it out at £100,000 or whatever. So that's one thing it makes sense to look at, is what's the actual calculation basis you, my employer, are using to work out my pension contributions. But that auto-enrollment system means if you're in the qualifying band, as most people are, you will get put in a pension. You will have money going into a pension for you. Now, the risk with that, and we've seen research to show this is true, a lot of people then go, oh, I'm in a pension. Job done. I don't need to think about this anymore. Well, as we've already started to talk about, that's not necessarily the case. So then you need to look at exactly what terms you've been put into a pension on and whether you can put more in or where your money's invested, because one of the characteristics of auto-enrollment is you get put into a default investment fund and that may not be suitable for you. So don't stop there. Just because you're in a pension, that's a great start, but you need to ask some more questions.
Let's talk about the default funds. So just to explain that again to people, when you are put into a pension at work, you're auto-enrolled. If you're not picking a fund, you're being put into a fund. This is the default fund. And if we think of like a Goldilocks example, this fund has got to appeal to millions of people, because I think around 90%, Nest advertise that 99% of their customers are in the default fund. They have about 12 million customers, say 15, whatever. And they've got to create a fund that fits all of those people at once. It's like a one-size-fits-all fund, right? So that means it tends to be a bit more cautious, would you say?
Yeah. So, and interestingly, what Nest did with their default fund is they go in phases. So for the first 5 years, you're in a foundation stage, and they deliberately make that relatively low risk because they worked out, and this is not necessarily a bad idea, though if people have been defaulted into a pension and then there's a stock market crash, and because it's 100% equity invested in shares, their money goes down, then people might look at that and go, oh my God, I've just been put into a pension and I've lost money. This is terrible.
I think it's a terrible idea. Right. Because I think they're trapped in that pension. They can't even choose to.
Right. So, but that was their logic, and I'm not arguing with them about it. So they said we'll do a foundation stage, then in the middle bit we'll do a growth stage when we go much more heavily into equities, and then we'll do a pre-retirement phase when we start to de-risk the fund.
15 years out.
Right, and then we'll do a post-retirement phase. Now, they've deliberately designed that default fund to be quite cautious. Nothing alarming will happen here. But in doing that, they've probably quite definitely sacrificed some of the potential upside in terms of the investment growth they could have achieved. So that's what they've done. That's not atypical. I mean, most default funds will do something similar to that, where they do they're designing a fund that is the least worst option for the most people, right? That does not necessarily mean it's the best option for you.
Yeah.
I mean, most people are risk averse, especially if they're not heavy investors. But when you say the growth stage and it goes a bit more heavily into equities, does it ever go 100% equities, or is it still
they can
quite
get close
conservative?
to? So, and it really just depends on which pension provider you're with, and actually even which pension scheme you're in with that particular pension provider. So just to take one example at random, Aegon, big Scottish insurance company, they have two different types of workplace pension, and I won't get too far into the weeds on the differences between them. But one of them, the default fund, is 95% invested in equities, so pretty heavy. The other one's 75% invested in equities. Now, so I would encourage anyone listening or watching to this to say, okay, go and ask your employer, what default fund am I actually in? What is the investment composition of that fund? And then have a think about, well, am I happy with that? If I'm young and I'm quite happy taking investment risk, and you should be when you're young, I think there's this problem with reckless conservatism where you deliberately avoid risk. No, take risk when you're young. The funds will go down. That's great. You buy cheaper units because they've gone down in price, so you can get more of them. And then when they go up again, this is an enterprise economy. We want growth over time, but it's a bumpy ride. So take that risk when you're young. Invest, I would say, 100% in equities. You've got to be comfortable with that. So you've got to ask yourself some questions whether you feel comfortable with this. But it's a pension. You're not going to see it for 20, 30, 40 years. To my eyes, it makes sense to do that. You'll get better returns in the long run, and you'll end up with a bigger pot. But that's not how the trustees of the pension schemes look at it. I use that phrase, least worst option for the most people. They're saying, we'll just come up with an average that we think is not going to alarm people. It's a fund that maybe 40-year-olds are in. Well, if you're 20, you've probably got a different perspective on risk compared to a 40-year-old. So,
yeah, I think this idea of risk, there's a quote that I like. It's the stock market is like someone riding up an escalator whilst playing with a yo-yo. Most people focus on the yo-yo when they should focus on the escalator.
Nice. Yeah, I like
so
that.
Risk, the risk you're talking about is short-term volatility, as in the fact that the price of your pension might drop in the short term. This is the yo-yo focus, right?
Yeah.
What you're actually saying is, so if you've got a long time line, you're riding the escalator up to the top, and we know over long periods of time the stock market tends to just trend upwards. So you should want as much exposure to that as possible. But these pension companies have a different kind of motive, in the sense of they're just trying to keep their broad customer base happy, to stop them from panicking and running away. And they use words like risk, which I think no one explains. That sounds scary, because do you want stable growth or do you want risk? Like, it's a horrible way of framing that kind of.
Because risk means different things to different people, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in your 20s, risk sounds interesting
risky.
and exciting.
It just sounds risky.
Yeah, right. When you're 58, or at risk, well, I'm not sure I want risk at this point in my life, because I want a bit more security. So, but the trustees of the pension scheme, they're also thinking about their own jobs, and the fact that if they take a lot of risk and then the fund drops 1 year, and then they're a bit of an outlier, and the benefit consultants, the guys, the gatekeepers who decide which pension schemes get selected by employers, they might look at the performance of your pension scheme over the last year and say, well, that one hasn't done so well in the last year. Maybe, Mr. Employer, when you're picking a pension scheme, you shouldn't go with them, you should go with someone else. So that short-termism can drive business flows. So trustees might tend to cluster around a median. They'll all do roughly the same thing because none of them want to be an outlier. That's their motivation, that's their focus. You as an individual can say, well, that's great, but that's your default fund. I'm going to go and pick a different fund. And you talked about equities and the stock market. I would absolutely argue for most people in favour of a global stock market. Don't just invest in the UK, because you're then betting on the UK being the most successful economy in the decades to come. And I would argue that's not necessarily a robust bet to make. So if you're investing in a global stock market, then you're getting exposure to the US and to Europe. And so
it's like Damien, it's like the Spider-Man meme, you two pointing at each other. Yeah. You're literally echoing what Damien says all the time.
Yeah. And it's nice that, credible people I say the same things.
Cybersecurity is becoming a growing concern for businesses in the UK. Hacking, phishing, duping. Look, I get it. I see people spoofing my account and likeness all of the time online to scam people. So if you want to get your business cyber secure and prove that you're secure, then you need to check out our partner Vanta. Whether you're a startup growing fast or you're already established, Vanta can help you get certified with stuff like GDPR and ISO 27001 without all of the headaches. Vanta massively reduces the time and effort you need to spend on cybersecurity. For example, the questionnaires that you have to fill out to prove you're compliant with these standards. With Vanta, you can get them done up to 5 times faster. The beauty is Vanta allows you to stop stressing over cybersecurity, taking up headspace so you can focus on what you do best, which is growing your business. You can get $1,000 off today by going to vanta.com/makingmoney. There's a link in the description for you.
So I have some real issues with the way that the default schemes are run and some of the pension providers, and there's a real appetite for the information. I made a video about Nest the other day. They have 6 funds that you can choose from, and the only fund that is 100% equities, or was, is their Sharia fund.
And even that's not 100% equity anymore.
No, they've added 30% Islamic bond allocation, sukuk.
Sukuk, yeah.
I can agree that Nest's overall philosophy is broad diversification, because you see that in every fund. But what I can't stomach is the fact that they acknowledge that people buy the Sharia fund for the 100% equity exposure, but they're just going to take that away. I did some kind of back testing in terms of, okay, let's take a 100% equity as represented by a Vanguard Global ETF or an MSCI World, whatever. And then let's look at a 70-30. And 70-30, what I mean is it's 70% equities and 30% in some other form of investment, typically bonds.
Typically bonds and cash.
Yeah. But Nest, I think they have property and all sorts in their funds, commodities as well.
Yeah, and they do some of the productive finance stuff that the government's so keen on as well. Some of the unlisted bonds and equities.
The difference in performance is about 2%, 3% over
what time period?
Over like 40 years, over an investing timeline. I did it from like the 70s, 80s until today. So saying over an average working life. The difference in performance in retirement was half of your pension. So you go from that individual paying £300, £400 a month, instead of having 3.4 million, had 1.8.
So where it's going to get interesting is, and we'll see how this one plays out because it may or may not work, but there is this push to introduce this value for money framework on pension schemes to surface this kind of data, to shine a bit of a sunlight on the decisions that pension schemes are making, the investment choices they're making, the charges they're deducting, the services they offer to their members, and to put all that out there. It's going to take a couple of years from now yet before
I did it in 10 minutes.
Right.
1.8% fee on Nest on contributions plus 0.3% fee. It's not that hard to get this info.
Obviously, the Department for Work and Pensions moves a bit slower than
well, I'll call it out a lot louder than they will then.
So maybe we'll get to the point where there's more scrutiny of that kind of data.
Yeah, because it just seems that they're in a very privileged position in sense of they basically get to be on this preferred supplier list of schemes and they just hoover in assets.
Yes.
And then 90% of people don't ask what they do with those assets.
Yes, and the whole motivation is we don't want to scare the horses. We don't want to alarm people. We'll do just a safe middle of the road option.
And we want predictable cash flows, maybe.
Yeah.
Because if you've got 30 billion in assets under management and the market drops 20% in 1 year, your slice, your 0.3%, takes a big hit. So maybe they go, well, we can forecast if we know that growth is going to be
Oh, you're cynical.
4 to 6%,
No.
I think we should be at these guys, like personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they're lovely people
this-
behind
this-
the
this-
scenes.
th-
But
This all comes back to the point that you as an individual, anyone watching this, should take the time to interrogate this information, to interrogate where their money's being put and decide whether that's right for them.
good. I think what I hope is that people see my passion around this and then they go, okay, I need to take this seriously. So let's say you log on, let's stop beating Nest up. You log on to any of them, any work-based pension scheme, and you look at the default. So you'll have this like big fund name and you'll have a fact sheet. What should people be looking at there? And then if they go, okay, I want to listen to people and I want more equity with a global exposure, how do I then go through the funds that are available and find one that suits that?
And then it's going to depend on how good they are at sharing the information with you. So there'll be fund fact sheets for all the different funds they offer. And you mentioned Nest. Well, they've only got a handful of funds, but other pension providers will have dozens or even hundreds of funds. Most of them have got better at helping people to pick funds. So a company I used to work for, Hargreaves Lansdown, thousands of funds. Like your brain explodes at this point. So what they do is they then funnel the information down and say, look, here's a list of best buy funds. If you want an international equity fund, here are 3 we really like, and again, there's regulatory interventions going on to make it easier for firms to do more of that kind of thing to help steer their customers towards better decision making. So that will
this
help.
guidance. So it's kind of like people like you rather
Correct,
than
all of that,
this is advice. Because if I have to worry about saying I buy VWRP or VWRL because people are always investment advice. It's just what I buy.
Damien does that.
Yeah,
Must be good,
I talked about the Invesco fund that they introduced. It was a low-cost global ETF that had, it wasn't perfect replication, but I said, oh, this is interesting. It's cheap. I'm going to buy that. And I saw the assets under management just whoop, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I can't even talk about funds because I do worry about this kind of thing. And I guess it's the same for Hargreaves
So the
Lansdown.
FCA wants to make it easier for firms to do that. And they kind of do it a bit already. They'll do more of it in the future. But what you get offered will depend on which pension provider your employer has put you in and what particular range of funds they've got. So then you've got to do the hard yards. So do you want active management? Do you want passive management? Do you want international equities? Some of the stuff we've already talked about here, and narrow down to a fund that you feel you're comfortable with, and that means maybe looking at the fund fact sheets, looking at the characteristics of the fund, and then. Also, this is not a once and done approach, right? So depending on how far out along that risk spectrum you go, like if you're in a self-invested personal pension, in theory, a SIPP, in theory, you could just put a portfolio of individual equities and individual shares in your pension fund. You could just have
Just buy one company. And
you
go,
could just buy one company, right?
Yeah.
There's quite a high risk exposure there.
Yeah.
So depending on what you do with that should dictate how often you then revisit it. Like, come back to that Nest default fund. The whole principle on which that was designed is we can just shove people into it, and if they never look at it for 30 years, it'll be fine. Nothing bad will happen here. As you say, there's an opportunity cost to their investment strategy, but it's designed for people who don't look at their pensions. Whereas, to take their other extreme, if you've bought one company in your SIPP, you should probably be looking at that every day.
Yeah. Okay.
So your investment strategy should then dictate how often you revisit the choices you made.
Have you got any rules of thumb of thinking about the mix between equities and bonds, or when people should start to de-risk or dilute away from equities?
Yeah, I think part of the answer to that question lies in what you're going to do with the money once you're in retirement. Because if you're going to just keep the fund invested and draw off the investment fund, you should probably stay largely invested in equities even into retirement, and maybe start to de-risk slightly and move towards bonds, but maybe still have over 50% of your investment assets in equities, even into your 60s. By contrast, to use an extreme example, if you're going to buy an annuity with your pension pot at the point of retirement, then by the time you get there, you really want to be about 75% or more invested in bonds. So your retirement income strategy, to some extent, should inform your pre-retirement risk strategy.
That makes sense, because you want to maximize the size of the, you want to guarantee that, you don't want a big drop and then you can't buy the annuity you want.
Well, annuity rates and bond prices are inversely correlated. So if the bond market goes down, the yield will go up, so you'll be able to get a higher annuity rate. So once you're invested in bonds, you're kind of locked in a bit in terms of the amount of income you'll get from retirement.
You guys are both pension experts and finance experts.
I like the air quotes there.
That air quote was for Jamie.
Experts. Yeah.
That's what it is. They talk a good game.
That's a big game.
But I was trying to sort out my SIPP last year. I mean, I know we're on workplace pensions, but you mentioned Hargreaves Lansdown, and that's who I use. And it's just like overwhelming. Yeah. There's so much selection, so much choice. You did give some good tips now, but where can someone actually start? Like if you're looking at all these funds, do you go, okay, global funds, or like how do you narrow it down to know what's good for you?
You can filter. You said like passive or active.
Yeah.
You know, for me, let's just run through what I would do because that might help people. I would always want to be passive because passive have lower fees, and I think we can control the fees. And when I say passive, it just means I want to track the market. So I'd filter out active personally because I don't personally feel that active managers have an edge, and I feel the fees they charge make me start the race 2 steps back. I then would go global rather than just America because I'm a citizen of the world. I live outside of America and I think, you know, the world has other things to offer. So I'm looking for a passive fund with global exposure. And I think it helps to have a fact sheet of another fund that maybe you can compare to. So when I look at pension funds on my work-based scheme, I would have a Vanguard global fund because I know that this is kind of like a gold standard global fund, and I can look at the distribution and go, okay, well, this fund is 65% America, 4% UK, and this fund that I'm looking at on my pension platform or for my SIPP, that kind of has a similar amount. Some of them you'll see it's a global fund and then it's 30% UK, and you're like, hold on, that's not what Vanguard is telling me the world is. You know, so have that kind of comparison, and the Vanguard fact sheets are really easy to get.
And then you might say to yourself, well, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. You know, that might be a good fund, but I'll pick 2 or I'll pick 3 just to spread it around. But there's no fixed cost to picking more than one fund typically.
Can you have the default and your own?
You can do that. Yeah, you can split your money between them. Yeah, if you felt like doing that.
So try it for a couple of years and see if it goes okay.
Absolutely. And then you can look at the performance of the funds. You can look at the narratives that they generally publish to say this is why this fund is doing what it's doing. We've made these investment choices. This is how it's, you know, with the default fund. This is why it's behaved in the way that it has. And you might say, okay, you know, they seem to know what they're doing. Or you might say, oh, this is just. And it's also important to bear in mind, even with the passive funds, they don't precisely track the indices. They kind of fudge things a little bit because they can't buy all the shares in every stock market around the world. So some passive funds, in theory, you could have 2 passive funds both tracking the same index, but the performances will not be identical.
I mean, obviously, like you said, if you get married or if you have a kid, change jobs, is it hard to change? Like if you're like, oh, this isn't performing well or I need something with more risk,
it's pretty straightforward. Simple. So some pension providers make it super easy and you can just do it online and it's 5 minutes work to click and say, no, I want to sell these, I want to switch them all to this fund, and then it's done, and I want to redirect future contributions into this fund instead. And they won't charge you for that, absolutely. There's no fixed fees for doing any of that. Some of them are a little less technologically accessible, so you might in theory even have to do it in paper, but most of them have got a lot better in the last few years, and a lot of pension providers have now produced apps to help you access your retirement savings.
So how forthcoming are they then if, let's say someone goes, because you go on Aviva, right? Aviva have got a lot of funds. So kind of like HL, it's almost, when I went on their website, I can't get access to them because I don't have the schemes, but it seemed like they had hundreds of choices, if not thousands, whereas Nest have got 6. So if I call up a pension provider and I say, I want a passive fund that tracks the global stock market, can you tell me what you've got? Will they give you that information?
They should, because that is information. You're not asking for advice. They may say to you, these are the 4 funds that we run that offer what you've asked for. So I would hope they would give you a sensible answer to that question, yes.
Because I've had people say that they say we can't give advice.
That's not advice.
You know, it's not advice. It's just like, basically show me your wares. You know, what products have you got?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm telling you what I want to see. This is not advice. I'm just asking for factual information. What passive global equity funds do you run? Well, they should be able to show you that.
So people can push back maybe and say, like, if you're not comfortable giving me that information, can I speak to a manager or whatever? Because, you know, someone will realize this isn't advice.
Yeah, and depend if you just assume you're in a workplace pension, you may be able to go to the people who run the pension for you within your employer, particularly if it's a small business. You can just go to your boss and go like, hey boss, you know, this pension's not working for me. I mean, you can actually have those conversations sometimes with your employers. And if it's a big company, they might have an HR department that selected the pension scheme for the employees. And again, maybe you can go and talk to them because they will probably have a relationship with the pension provider. And they may be able to give you some help with it, or point you towards where you can get better information about it. So don't think you just have to bash your head against a brick wall with an anonymous pension company that doesn't answer the phone. There may be other ways you can get access to information, or possibly even lobby your boss to change the pension scheme that he selected for you if it's the kind of company where you can do that.
They work for you and they're going to earn a lot of money out of you over the course of your working life. So pick up the phone and they should answer the questions, right?
Absolutely.
With the employer stuff, I want to touch on this because we have a lot of people that are employers, and I see questions all the time. When I did my Nest video, people said, who's better, Damien? And how do I pick someone who's better for my staff? Because I think the Nest offering is attractive to employers because they do everything. They come in and they're kind of like, we fix it quick.
The reason Nest exists is because back in 2008, when they started designing the auto-enrollment system and then they legislated for it from 2012, they had to have a universal default, because otherwise they were going to pass legislation that says every employer must select a pension scheme for their staff. Well, your small chip shop owner who's got a relatively unattractive proposition for a pension provider, they might have struggled to actually find a pension company that would be willing to set up a workplace pension scheme for them. And we couldn't have that because legally they were obliged to. So you needed to have Nest as a backstop, as a public service obligation that they would take any employer or any individual, and that's their job. And we've lent them well over £1 billion in loans from the taxpayer to fund the setup of the Nest pension scheme, and maybe one day they'll pay that money back. But
they're taking 1.8% on contributions, so why are they not paying it back?
That's the 1.8. That's what the 1.8 is for. And in theory, it's to pay back the loans that they took from the taxpayer.
I mean, they've got 30 billion in assets under management, so 2% of that is what?
They're taking 1.8 as an initial charge and 0.3% as an ongoing.
But they've got 30 billion in assets under management, which is forecast by the end.
It was very expensive to set up.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
so that
Call
was
me cynical.
They were just firing shots at all of them.
That's the reason Nest exists. Is that it was a backstop scheme, and in through that lens, they've done a good job. And they've provided this universal proposition.
I'd not considered this idea that if you've got a chip shop owner that maybe Scottish Widows are like, you're not. So
Scottish Widows are a commercial entity.
Yeah, they can't lose money setting up these little schemes or whatever. But no, I can get that. But yeah, it does seem that the billion in loans and then the 1.8% fee, which is almost like another tax on workers.
Whereas if you're like Goldman Sachs and you go and knock on a pension provider's door and says, I've got these really highly paid employees. Can you set up a pension scheme? Yeah, absolutely.
Would you like some champagne?
Yeah. We can offer you some pretty good terms.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how it works. So in theory, your employer can change pension schemes, and they do from time to time. There is an active market in consultants helping employers to shift pension schemes. But employers, I talked about this value for money framework that's coming in. In theory, that will help employers access information about the different pension providers in the marketplace, the services they offer, the charges they deduct, how their investments are performing, what their default fund is, that kind of information. The other thing an employer can do is use the services of a financial advisor or an employee benefits consultant who earn their money advising employers and acting as a go-between and facilitating the setting up of pension schemes. And that's what they do.
And what should be the key things? Is it fees? Is it product range? What?
So as an employer, you've got to I think you need to be motivated a bit, perhaps on ease of use, right? Because there's an impact on your business in the interaction you have with pension providers, and some are better than others in terms of their administration services and the interface with your payroll systems and the remittance of the contributions on behalf of your employees. And you want all that to work absolutely seamlessly. And if you've got a problem with it, you want to be able to pick up the phone and talk to someone about it. So from the employer's point of view, that may be a consideration in which pension scheme you select for your staff. And then, yes, also you want to take a view on what kind of workforce have I got? Are they the kind of workforce who will actually just be happy with Nest because they're not going to think about their pensions at all? And so I'm just going to give them that because it's a safe, simple default option. Or have I got the kind of workforce who will want a wide range of investment funds? Well, okay, I should look for a pension company that does that. And what can I get in the way of most competitive fees? And then I might use a one of those employee benefit consultants I talked about, who will actually go and negotiate terms with the pension provider on my behalf and get the most competitive fees that they can for my staff. So all that sort of stuff comes into play.
Okay. I just think I want to encourage everyone who's a member of staff, an employee at a business, to take their pension as seriously as they take their wages, and to look at this when they go at a job and go, what's the match contribution you're offering me? Who's the provider? And then once you're in that scheme, go, what is the default fund? And should I be moving out of this into something that suits my risk profile? Because that simple decision alone, no more money, could double the amount that you end up with.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that I think is worth just staying on. I agree with everything you said. And that matched contribution thing is really important. Something some employers choose to do is to say, well, these are the default contribution rates, Damien, but if you put in an extra 1%, I'll put in an extra 1% or even an extra 2%. I want to motivate you to put more money into your pension. And I will go on that journey with you. And if you put more in, I'll put more in on top. And that's worth doing.
I miss that so much. Yeah. As a self-employed person now, I get my own benefits with pensions around corporation tax, but there's no one doubling my money or giving me a match contribution. I always worked at pretty terrible employers around pension contribution. It was always like the statutory basics. Yeah. But I hear some people going, if I put 1 in, they put 6 in, which is insane.
Well, I mean, the other one is, should we talk about salary sacrifice now?
Please.
Okay,
Go on. How can people understand the different ways that money goes into a pension?
Right. So the recent budget, the Chancellor announced that she was increasing the national insurance taken from employers. So it was 13.8%. So for every £100 you get paid as an employee, your employer has to give £13.80 to the government as an employer's national insurance. Well, that's about to go up to 15%. So for every £100 they give you, they have to give £15 to the government. Well, what you can do, and some very helpful employers do this, is they'll say, well, look, I want you to pay me £100 less. And I want you instead to put that £100 into my pension for me. That means I don't pay any income tax on that £100 and I don't have to pay any national insurance on that £100. And really generous employers, they don't have to do this, but some do. They'll say, well, because I'm now putting that £100 into your pension for you instead of giving it to you as pay, I no longer have to give that £15 to the government as my employer's national insurance. So I'll tell you what I'll do. Because it would have cost me that £15 anyway, because I'm a nice guy, I will give you that £15 into your pension. So instead of getting, let's say you're a basic rate taxpayer, £100 in pay means 20% tax, that's £80, plus the national insurance I've got to pay on top of that as an employee, right? So instead of that, I could have £115 paid into my pension. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, it gets kind of crazy at this point because the national insurance rate that you pay drops 22%. But whereas for basic rate taxpayers, it's 8% national insurance. So let's say you're a high rate taxpayer. You're no longer paying £40 in tax on that £100 that's given to you as pay, and you no longer have to pay £2 in national insurance. So instead of getting £58 in your pay, you could have £115 paid into your pension. You've pretty much doubled your money. Yeah. Boom, right? So that idea of salary sacrifice is a really efficient way to put money into your pension. And if you have an accommodating employer, it's really fantastic if they give you that national insurance as well. So,
not all schemes are salary sacrifice, are they? Do you think we'll see a bigger shift towards salary sacrifice because it's such a credible way of the employer reducing the NI bill?
And because that cost has now gone up, so it's become more attractive to do the salary sacrifice. So yes, I think we'll see more and more employers doing that. It wouldn't surprise me if the Chancellor thinks about what she did back in the budget and increased the national insurance rate and says, hang on, I'm going to ban people from doing salary sacrifice. And it'd be quite complicated to do that. But in theory, she could stop people from asking employers to do what I've just described. So,
nothing like disincentivizing people to save for their retirement during a pension crisis.
Yeah. So what I would say is if your employer offers salary sacrifice, think hard about doing it. Check what particular terms they offer it on, because they might say, well, I'll give you half the national insurance savings. So check it out. Go and talk to your payroll department or your HR department or your boss or whoever's in control of this. Find out whether they'll do that for you. Salary sacrifice is a really efficient way of doing that. And if you're a higher rate taxpayer, it means you automatically get the higher rate tax relief. And as has been highlighted before, if you're a high rate taxpayer, sometimes, depending on your circumstances, you have to go and claim the high rate tax relief. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So you might have to go and say through your tax return, oh, by the way, I put money into a pension, you owe me an extra 20% tax relief. Well, if you do the salary sacrifice, you just automatically get the tax relief because you're just not paying tax on that £100. So it's a more efficient way of getting your tax relief.
Let's just pin on that a sec, just so it's really clear to people. If you walk into your HR department and you speak to them, you go, how is the money paid into my pension? If there's salary sacrifice, you're getting this benefit, and you might then go, okay, well, what happens to the NI you save? But the relief
they won't do. Sorry to interrupt you. They won't do salary sacrifice unless you specifically ask them to.
Okay.
Because my salary is £30,000. I would actually have to go to them and say, I want you to pay me £29,900. I am giving up some of my salary. So they're not going to do that unless you ask them to. But if you ask them to, they might do it. And some employers are really generous, and they'll write round to their staff and say, by the way, we offer a salary sacrifice scheme. Would you like us to do this for you?
But the relief at source point is really interesting, because this is another thing that people might be able to do this year that just earns them thousands of pounds out of nowhere. I made a video on this, and a lady got in touch over Instagram and said, I watched your video. Me and my friend went into work the next day and we've just claimed back $8,000 each.
Wow.
And she was like, that's
because she was missing out on the high rate relief.
She claimed back 4 years worth, and what was, can you explain what's going on there? And I think it's 1.5 billion a year is not claimed. So this is there's a lot of money that's on the table, and people listening to this right now will be able to do this tomorrow.
So some pension schemes will take your pension contributions out of your gross pay, which means you simply don't pay tax on that money that gets paid into your pension scheme by your employer. Great. So you've automatically had tax release because you just haven't paid tax on that money. But other pension schemes, as you've described, you pay the money gets taken out of your pay, out of your net pay, after tax has been deducted. It gets paid over to the pension company. The pension company will then claim basic rate tax relief from the government. So you get 20% back into your pension scheme, and it gets paid directly into your pension scheme. Great. If you're a basic rate taxpayer, job done. But if you're a higher rate taxpayer, or if you're a top rate taxpayer, you're eligible for another 20 or 25% tax relief on the money that got paid into your pension. But you won't get it unless you put that money on your tax return and you say, look, I paid £1,000 into my pension, you owe me some more tax relief. So you have to claim the extra money back from HMRC.
You can call them, you can email them, and you can do a self-assessment at the end of the year. And that's if you go into your employer tomorrow and say, is our scheme relief at source? And they say yes, and you're a higher rate taxpayer, you could potentially do this, and you can go back 4 years.
No, you're absolutely right, and you don't have to wait and do it in your tax return at the end of the year. You can just write to HMRC and say, by the way, I've been making these pension contributions, you owe me some money.
Yeah, enjoy that, people. Yeah. Happy January. That's why you listen to Making Money. But yeah, I know, the thing is, say 40,000 people listen to this episode, there's going to be hundreds of people that applies to, and it's like a big amount of cash, isn't it? Because if you're paying, 8% or 4% of your income times by 4 years, it's a lot of money.
And I don't have the number in my top of my head, but it's billions of pounds that goes unclaimed every year.
Yeah, and
HMRC is surprisingly quite relaxed about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. and you call me cynical. Because most people who, from most people who have a SIPP or whatever are aware of this. They know that, I need to claim that back. It's this apathy again of the auto enrollment that makes people think everything's been done for me. So they don't realise that they need that to claim that 20%. And it doesn't go into your pension; you get it as cash in your bank account.
No, right?
It's like you should put it into your pension. That's what you should do. But you just get a lump of cash, don't you? Tax-free cash.
Yeah. And if you've been missing out on it, as you say, there could be years worth of free money there.
It's not just that; it's the 4 years bonus. Like happy birthday, plus every year you can claim it again. So going forward, potentially it's tens of thousands of pounds over a career that you can claim back.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, well, thanks for explaining that, because I kind of mention it all the time, but I think people can get a bit lost in the weeds. And I think, what I want to do today is make sure that people have actionable things that they can go away with that aren't just go pay more money in. Get out of the default fund and check if your scheme is relief at source and claim back the tax relief. And, have a holiday on us or put it into your pension. Yeah.
One group of people that don't really seem to get much help with their finances are small business owners. They're not really big enough to have a CFO or a finance director, so they often outsource work to do with their finances, like accounting. This can result in a few things, but one of them is they don't get good, actionable advice on what to do with the excess money inside of their business. And what normally happens is they just leave that cash sat in a business bank account getting no interest. This is why we're happy that we're partnering with Tide. They offer an instant access saver account where new customers can get 4.07% AER variable on unlimited deposits until June 1st, 2025. If you'd like to put the excess capital in your business bank account to good use, head to the link in the description. You'll also find there the full offers, T's and C's and Tide's terms. The variable rate is correct as of the 19th of December 2024.
So what about people that aren't young, so they're not getting a full stretch of auto-enrollment, or they've just missed out on a DB pension because they were either slightly too young for those or not everyone got them. They're in their 50s, late 40s or something, and they're panicking because they're thinking, I've not got much runway here.
Yeah, and there's not an easy answer for those people, and you're absolutely right to ask that, because they are the people to some degree who've fallen through the cracks, right? So because of the shifts in the pension system, there are going to be people perhaps watching this in their 40s, early 50s, who are in that situation, and there is no easy answer to that. So all you can do at this point is save as much as you can and think about when you're going to be able to afford to retire. And I'd come back to that pension calculator question. Look at your situation today. Look at your income. Look at how much you might have saved already, because you'll probably have some savings. And then think about at what point you can afford to retire and what your standard of living will look like in retirement. But there's no magic parachute of money at this point. It's just we are where we are.
The reassuring things at that age, Joe, are first of all, you're close to being able to access the pension. So it's not a 20-year thing. It's like if you're 50 or 52, really, you can access that money in a few years.
Yeah.
So it's really, you could slam money into it if you can afford that and get the savings rate high, 25, 30, 40%, because it's really tax efficient, and then you get your tax-free lump sum. You get to see that benefit sooner, don't you?
Yes, you do. I would make the point that compound interest, as you've talked about before, the longer you can leave it, the more investment growth you'll get, the better value you'll get back out of it. But that may mean having to work a bit longer than you would have liked.
I was about to say, can those people just keep working, keep contributing to their pension and say, okay, instead of retiring at 60, I'm going to retire at 65, or instead of retiring at 55, I'll retire at 70.
And that may be a necessity. And then maybe you're into the realms of thinking, well, okay, how can I adjust my lifestyle? Can I shift how I earn my income? I don't want to keep doing the job I'm doing because it's just not fun. I don't want to be doing this when I'm in my mid-60s. Well, okay, what else can you do? What can you train to do now that might serve you further down the line? Think ahead.
There's some kind of consultancy work or stuff from a laptop rather than, Can we just talk about self-employed now? Because you made a really interesting point that this guy's happy.
Yes, finally.
Are you even self-employed? I swear you have a job.
I'm still self-employed.
Yeah,
I'm a contractor.
Yeah.
IR35.
Yeah, squiggly career guy over here. Yeah, no one knows what he does. He's like Chandler, our friends. It's just like, what does he do?
Business.
He just changes job. Import, export. Yeah, real shady character. With the self-employed, you said that there's been a collapse in the savings in the self-employed. What's going on there?
So around 16%, I think was the last number I saw, 16% of self-employed people, 1 in 6 are still making pension contributions. So like,
so 1 in 6 are only
1 in 6 are still making pension contributions, right?
Why do you say still?
Right, but, well, okay, this is all. We shouldn't think of the self-employed as one sort of homogenous lump. They're individual people, right?
But only 15% are paying into their pension.
Correct, yes, because understandably, pensions don't entirely work for you if you're self-employed. Earlier on, we talked about the inaccessibility of the money and how that's a good thing in terms of locking money away for your retirement, but self-employed lead a slightly more precarious existence than the employed population, and I can understand self-employed people feeling uncomfortable about locking money away in a pension, and month by month, they're meeting their household bills, they're trying to perhaps to reinvest in their business activities. If you lock that money away in a pension, you don't get it back again until you're at least 55, 56, 57, 58, depending on
75.
Because the age at which you can access your pension is going up, but it's locked away, right? So there is this alternative, the lifetime ISA, which offers similar tax breaks to a pension. Certainly if you're a basic rate taxpayer, there's no difference. You get the same 20% top up from the government, right? But you can get the money out again if you need to. Now, you have to pay a little bit of a penalty if you do get the money out. So there is a price to be paid for that. If you're using the money in the lifetime ISA for either a house purchase or for your retirement, then all well and good. If you're using it for any other purpose, then you're going to pay a bit of a penalty. But if I was self-employed, a self-employed basic rate taxpayer, I'd probably do a lifetime ISA before I did a pension because of that accessibility question. So
If the worst case happens, you can get at the money.
Correct,
You end up worse off because they take 25% off,
if
don't they?
you've got a nice chunky sum of money sitting in the bank, right? If you've been fortunate enough to build up a cash reserve, so you've got good financial resilience, then you might say to yourself, I don't worry about locking money away in my pension now, because if the worst happens and I can't work for a while or I can't earn money, it's okay. I've got this financial reserve. I'll be fine, right? I can cut down my outgoings. And that might be you. And if that's the case, maybe you think, well, I am going to put money into a pension. And if I'm a higher rate taxpayer and I'm going to get 40% relief because I claim it back because Damien told me to, right? Then maybe I'm going to decide a pension is still a better deal for me. Or maybe I'll do a bit of both. But I think the whole pension retirement savings proposition as it exists in the UK today and the tax treatment of pensions, I can see why for a lot of self-employed people it just doesn't look super attractive. And then some of them will say, maybe I'll buy a house instead. Or, I've got together with my partner and so we've ended up accidentally owning 2 properties. Let's keep both those properties and let's rent one out as an investment property. And that'll be part of our retirement savings strategy. And we'll maybe do lifetime ISAs so we can get the money if we need it. Or we've maxed out on lifetime ISAs. Let's do conventional ISAs as well, because there's a cap on how much you can put into a lifetime ISA. So I get that for self-employed people, a pension, that inaccessibility of the money, maybe that doesn't work for me.
So I'm a limited company director, and from my perspective, the pension contribution is the best thing I can do, because it basically, the problem you have if you're a limited company director, I mean, it's a first world problem, is you can't get the money out of the business. Mm-hmm. So because you pay the corporation tax, 20 odd percent, 20 plus, whatever. If I then pull it out, I pay dividend and like income related taxes.
Yes, you can't avoid it. Yeah.
And once you're at a higher rate of dividend tax, you're talking like effective tax rates. So like 60% once you come, if you say like, okay, the corporation tax is the business tax, but I'm paying both sets of taxes. Any money I pull out, I'm getting 40p in the pound or whatever. Whereas in the pension, I can slam it all in.
Or
and get
you can
it
make an employer contribution into a pension.
And I pay
name.
no corporation and I pay no dividend. And I've got it out of the business into my own name, essentially. And I will pay tax on it at some point, but it's much more favorable. So to hear you say that you don't think they're attractive, is that because people don't understand that, or is it because most businesses are sole traders?
Well, you asked the question about self-employed people. Yeah. So if you're not incorporated, I think...
Okay. Okay. So I'm an employee of a limited company. Yeah. You're right.
So I think that's the distinction I'm making there.
Yeah.
I guess the same dilemma you have to consider is as a business owner, okay, you're incorporated, fine. But you're still making that same decision. Am I happy to lock this capital away? What kind of reserves does my business have? What kind of reserves do I have? If I can't keep working for a period of time, am I going to be okay? So that overall financial resilience that you as an individual enjoy, I would suggest is part of the decision-making process here.
So when because as a limited company director, I identify as self-employed, but from a technical perspective, I'm not. So the stats where you said only 15% of self-employed.
We're talking about actually self-employed people, of which there are several million in the country.
And this is sole trader kind
correct,
of.
Yes, or delivery drivers or whatever.
Okay, yeah. So this makes more sense. So I'm not familiar. Are you a sole trader?
That's what I'm saying. I'm a sole trader. He's a big boy with this company.
I'm an employee, mate. It turns out. I can't. I'm not. I've had it taken away from me. I want to be an entrepreneur.
Have you got a good boss?
Yeah. He's a bit of a dick, to be honest.
He eats a lot. His boss eats a lot of food. He loves the pies. You do. For sole trader, I'm a sole trader, but I'm thinking about limited company. What do you think is, obviously it's very hard to say, but what are the pros of being a sole trader and investing towards your pension and compared to being a limited company?
Yeah, what are the structures for sole traders?
Okay, and I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole because I'm not a tax expert. No. And I think, there's a risk the tail ends up wagging the dog here. So the decision as to whether to incorporate or not probably shouldn't be driven purely by, is this the most efficient way for me to save for retirement? Mm-hmm. You should probably be looking at it in terms of, is this the right business decision for me to make? And the different tax treatments you get depending on whether you're incorporated or a sole trader, that's what should be driving that decision-making process. I think for all the reasons Damien's touched on, if you are incorporated, you've got more choices about how you fund your pension and ways that you can use the pension tax relief system to your advantage. Whereas if you're a sole trader, you're just generating profits, you're charging fees to your customers or clients or whatever, and then you've got to report that at the end of the year. I think one of the difficulties with all of that, and I hear this a lot from self-employed people, is just the commitment to make regular contributions to a pension, right? So if you're in a workplace pension scheme, you're getting a salary every month, your employers put you in a workplace pension, you've got deductions being taken, it's just happening for you. If you're self-employed, your money probably is fluctuating a lot more, it goes up and down. That decision to make a commitment, I am going to put £100 a month or whatever the number is into a pension month in, month out, that's quite a hard call. So maybe you think, well, I'm not going to do that. I'll just do a once a year sweep up. I'll put a lump sum in, and maybe that works for you. But that's a more high risk strategy in terms of making the investments, because you're putting a lump of money into the stock market in one go at the end of the year. And maybe you get to the end of the year and think, I'm not comfortable taking a big chunk of money out of my profits this year and putting it into a pension. Maybe I'll skip it this year. And
it becomes manana.
Yeah, and I think the discipline of making that regular contribution has some virtue as well.
You literally, it's like you're watching me from the cupboard, seeing what I get up to. Like every quarter.
You wouldn't want to do that. You would not want to do that. You
burn your eyes with bleach. I don't want to see anymore. I don't want to.
This is taking a dark turn.
Yeah.
I do like quarterly contributions, but there were quarters last year. And I was like, maybe not now. Right. I'll do it like next month. I'll do it next quarter, and then you just don't, because other things come. Like, I'll put it in my ISA this month, and maybe next month I'll do my SIPP, and then it always seems to get pushed away. So And
there's no easy way around that. And I know the government is thinking about this, and the government is thinking, well, we've kind of solved the employee problem with the whole auto enrollment program. We've certainly made a big step forwards to getting everybody into a pension. How we do that same thing for the self-employed, that's not easy. And whether you end up with digital platforms through that self-employed people use for their tax reporting solutions, maybe that's where we go in the future. But just creating that mechanism that means that the majority of self-employed people are making a regular saving contribution for their retirement is not simple. And I come back to the point I made earlier that if I were a basic rate tax paying self-employed person, I'm not at all sure I'd use a pension anyway.
Yeah.
Or I might use up a lifetime ISA first and then go to pension.
Could you just tell people about the limits on lifetime ISAs? I think you put in $4,000, you get one from the government.
Correct. Yeah.
You tell them to.
Yeah, I might be familiar with a LISA or two. I might have put in a little bit here and there. It's the maximum you can put in a year. 4,000.
Yes, 4,000.
So, but if you have your partner, you can, in your household, you can put in 8,000, and then the government will give you 2,000 between you.
And you have to be under the age of 40 when you first open a lifetime ISA, and then you can keep funding it till you're the age of 50. And a lot of people have argued that that's one of the things that should change, that lifetime ISAs should be more broadly available, and that people should be able to come along at the age of 45 when they first become self-employed and go, now I want to open a lifetime ISA.
And also,
I will never have a lifetime ISA under the current
why?
I know, because I was too old.
So everyone
when they were
39,
first introduced, I was already over the age of 40. So that's
everyone who's 39 actionable. If you're a sole trader, look at the lifetime.
Just open one up. Just
open one up while you can. Yeah.
But the key distinction is as well cash versus stocks and shares, right? Yes. So you should treat it like a pension. You probably invest it. So you'd be looking for a stocks and shares LISA.
Yeah.
If you're happy to put it in for the long term, but you might be thinking, well, I need to get that money again, and so
property.
But then the penalty, because you're going to end up worse off than when you.
I agree with you. Don't put the money in thinking I might have to pull it out again. Put the money in, invest it, make it grow, and then if the worst happens, well, at least you can get it, even if it's at a bad moment and the stock market's gone down a bit. At least you can still get, hopefully, the most of your money back.
The government, I was really disappointed in the budget from a few months ago that they didn't remove that penalty. They should just.
They didn't look at ISIS at all in the budget. I guess she talked for an hour and 17 minutes. It was all big picture stuff. There wasn't much retail stuff.
Well, if you look at the what's interesting, if you look at the breakdown of the tax receipts or the forecasts, I mean, I know you can't really predict, like look at those numbers, but they say that by 2030, they think they'll be raising 600 million a year from ISAs, which is fiscal drag, I'd imagine, by holding the band. So I think doing nothing with ISAs is the exact thing they're going to do long term in terms of you get your 20K and we're just going to hold it.
So, and you had Liam Byrne on here a lot long ago, didn't you? Who's really good, and he's a great talker. Let's not forget, he's the guy who said, "I'm sorry, there's no money left." Back in 2010. You know,
I think he hasn't forgotten that. He lives with that. He lives with that, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this government faces a lot of challenges. I think they are very so. One of the new members of the government, Torsten Bell, ex-Resolution Foundation,
the 100K limit.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's some of that thinking going on.
He deleted every tweet as soon as he came into office.
Very sensible.
I think that was like, some hard left think tank piece that pinned anyone with more than 100 grand as rich, and I was very critical of it.
Torsten, we haven't forgotten.
No. And if it's and I think I mean, it was the Resolution Foundation's paid the 100K cap. It would be disastrous. It'd be stupid because people with 100 grand aren't rich. Not 100 grand in retirement savings.
But are they working people?
Yeah. Well, anyone who trades time for money is probably a working person, right? But who knows? So the LISA thing, attractive, but it's this key point of if you take money out and you're not buying your first home or you're 60, you're going to have less money than you put in.
Yeah, you pay a 25% penalty, and so it's effectively a 6.25% penalty relative to what you got from the government in the first place when the money went in. So there is that. In extremis, you can at least get in your money, which you can't do with a pension. For self-employed people, maybe we're back to that mix and match approach. Maybe you do a bit of both, a bit of pension, particularly if you're a high rate taxpayer, you get the higher relief on the pension. Bit of lifetime ISA to get the
and a normal ISA.
Yeah, and a normal ISA. Let's hear it for normal ISA.
Yeah, they're definitely more attractive. Or they're getting more attractive, aren't they? In terms because of the changes to pensions. We'll get onto that in a second. Yeah. But I think if you've got concerns, I went when I first went self-employed, as in when I first became when I first became an entrepreneur or whatever you want to call me. I'm a bloody content creator. When I make videos in my spare bedroom for a living, I was paranoid that it was the wheels were going to fall off, and I just sat on cash, and I can really empathise with that. And especially if you're not a high earner, you talk about gig workers, people who are doing Uber Eats. They might think, or just Ubers in general, if I have a bad day, I've got no money, so I can't just fire it away. Yeah. They need to make the pensions for those people no-brainers, because for the employed, it's a no-brainer. Get the match contribution. For me, it's a no-brainer. Get the money out of the limited company without being rinsed on tax. For them, it doesn't seem like a no-brainer.
One of the ideas that's been doing the rounds, and we have to credit your friends at Nest for coming up with this in the first place, is this idea of a sidecar account, that this would run alongside a workplace pension. So
10% fee. That's to be like, we'll run it 10% fee. Lend us $1 billion to set it up.
So there's been talk about, there's legislation's been passed to change the auto enrolment rules, to reduce the age to 18, to get rid of that £6,000 disregard we talked about earlier on. But so the argument is, well, look, if we do that, let's not hit because that then means an increase in contributions, and that might unsettles some people. Hang on, the amount I pay into my pension has suddenly gone up, and I could only just about afford well, what we could do is the increased amount that you're been taken out of your pay to go into your pension. We could not pay it into a pension. We could pay it into a sidecar account, which is a cash account that would sit alongside your pension, and we're just going to make it easy for you to build up a household financial reserve of cash. For millions of people, that currently doesn't exist. Millions of people have very little in the way of spare cash in the bank to cover unexpected eventualities. So just helping them to do that and get to the point where you've got hundreds or maybe low thousands of pounds as a reserve account to draw on, then come back to our conversation about risk, then makes it easier for you to take more risk or to lock money away in a pension, or maybe boost the amount you're putting into a pension because you've got that.
An auto-enrolled emergency fund.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the concerns is, well, yeah, but we could help people to do that and they'll just keep taking the money out. Yes, they might, but not everybody will. Experience suggests that quite a lot of people would go, oh, thank you. That's actually quite handy for me. You've found a way to help me build up a cash reserve that I wasn't quite getting around to doing myself. Because like T, I keep going, no, I'll do it next quarter. And, so
Holiday time.
Yeah.
How nanny state do you think we should get with these kind of things?
Well, we have a Labour government. They're kind of more inclined to being a nanny state. Look, I think auto enrolment was a good thing. It repaired a failure of the pension system that because it was you no longer had automatic membership, participation rates were collapsing. We weren't saving enough for retirement. Auto enrolment has turned that around. So I'm kind of okay with that bit of nanny state. I think probably I'd argue the same is true around the sidecar account, that with the best will in the world, a lot of people don't have that household financial resilience, and that is critical to enabling them to be more entrepreneurial, to take more risk. You take risk if you're doing it from a solid foundation. If you're in a precarious situation, it's really hard to take risks. So if a bit of nanny statism, a bit of nudging helps people build those foundations, I'm personally okay with that.
Yeah, I do agree that one of the things that I say is that whilst investing didn't make me rich, what it did allow me to do was jump when the opportunity came in terms of the YouTube channel, and it allowed me to turn my back on my career. Whereas, because I was earning good money, there's a lot of people out there that are just so on the line, even though they're earning 100 grand a year, they're thinking, I can't leave this job because how am I going to feed the kids and pay my mortgage?
If it goes wrong for a couple of months, I'm in trouble.
I'm 8 weeks from bankruptcy. You know the stat of like most people, if I said to you, if you didn't get paid for 2 months, would you survive? The answer is no, without going into extreme debt. So I do think, it's a nice idea that if we force everyone to have an emergency fund, maybe people would start being more entrepreneurial and maybe there's some growth there to be had. But it would need to come on top of the pension contributions, because otherwise the people just rinsing it constantly would just have a cash savings account and never save for pension. So would you be saying 8% auto enrollment plus a 2%?
So that was the logic, is we need to do this increase to auto enrollment because there's a general consensus that the 8% probably isn't enough for most people. So if we're going to make the increase to the contributions, could we do it by initially funneling some money into a sidecar account and then maybe redirecting it into a pension subsequently? The stuff that could be done there. I talked earlier on about how there's that bunch of people in the kind of mid to high income brackets who are probably the most undersaved at the moment in terms of retirement provisions. So another thought process is, do we start modifying the auto enrollment amounts and say, well, people on 20 grand a year, given that generous state pension relative to their pre-retirement income, they're mostly okay. We don't need to get them to save anymore, and it would probably just damage their standard of living today if we started taking more money out of their pay packet. So we'll leave them where they are. Those people on 50, 60 grand a year, we need to get them to put quite a lot more in. Let's get them up to 12%. People on over 100 grand a year, well, they're a different proposition again. So maybe one direction we go in the future is we actually start having more than one auto enrollment rate. And part of that could involve channeling money into the cash accounts as well. There's a lot of directions we could go in with all of this.
What I would like to know is your opinion on just the conversation around pensions. Where should that go? We seem to be making all these decisions for people in the background and then not explaining them to them.
Yeah, so what worries me, and so the virtue of auto enrollment is it was just done. It was defaults all the way. Let's not worry people's heads about it. And then people kind of go, oh, I'm in a pension now. That's great. Thanks for that. Right. But they're not thinking about it. So that's a problem, because we have to get to the point where people are more engaged with this and are thinking about it. And then I think when you take a step back, we talked earlier on about the state pension. What are we trying to achieve here? What does good look like in terms of the level of state provision, the level of risk exposure from the state to longevity? If the population ends up living longer than expected, how much of that burden needs to be carried by the taxpayers of tomorrow? To what extent should we be getting people to make their own retirement savings provision and owning those retirement savings provisions and thinking about what money they're putting aside? And so if you're diligent and you save well and you invest well and you prosper, well, you'll be rewarded for that. As opposed to the Torsten Bell mindset of we just want to punish wealth accumulation. So I don't feel like we're having that big picture conversation around what does a stable structure for the state pension look like over the next 20, 30, 40 years that gives people that confidence to save for retirement.
In a second, I'm going to ask Tom how he thinks the autumn budget in 2024 changed pensions. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you know that we've got a free webinar coming up on what to do with a lump sum. We get this question a lot, and it's really tricky for us to answer because we can't give financial advice. So what we're doing is we're bringing in financial advisor Lisa Conway-Hughes, and she can answer questions. You can sign up using the link in the description, and let's get back to the episode.
There was, in the recent budget, the last one we had, there was some quite big changes around how pensions will be treated from an inheritance tax perspective. All my friends who are financial advisors were saying this is a very big deal, even though it wasn't made a big deal in the budget. What do you feel about it, and how should people approach this?
Yeah, I'm really glad you've asked that. It's quite a subtle change, but it's quite an important change that I think will have quite widespread implications going forwards in terms of how people view pensions. So hitherto, pensions have essentially been free from inheritance tax, and changes George Osborne made back in 2015 means that you could pass on the accumulated value of your pension fund largely tax-free. So if you died before the age of 75, the money just could go to whoever, tax-free. Brilliant, fantastic, couldn't be better. After the age of 75, if you pass the money to your spouse, then it's still tax-free, but to anyone else, it becomes subject to income tax at the point they draw the money out of your pension. Actually, even if your spouse draws it out of the pension, they'll pay income tax on it. It becomes subject to income tax. So what's changed is that as a result of the budget, the pension pot will also be subject to inheritance tax. And it will still also be subject to income tax if you die after the age of 75. So you've got effectively double taxation on the money. So where up until now, I know a lot of people, wealthier savers, were saying, I'm using my pension pot as part of my inheritance tax planning strategy. And in some cases, were actually drawing on their pension last because that was the most efficient way to pass their wealth on to the next generations, and drawing on things like ISAs instead beforehand. From when the changes come in 2027, your pension pot will be subject to both inheritance tax at the point of death and income tax as well when the money gets drawn out. So it means preserving the capital in your pension pot has got significantly less attractive. And I think one of the consequences of that is people will, one, draw down on their pensions a bit more readily than would have been the case otherwise, but possibly also will be more inclined to look at those annuities we talked about before, because you optimize the lifetime value of the money by buying an annuity and exchanging it for the optimum value of income you can get before you die. And given how much tax is going to go when you die, it's perhaps better to have the money up front. And indeed, one thing you can do is draw the income out of your pension pot. Okay, you pay income tax on it, but then you can actually use that income to gift money to your dependents and get it outside your estate for inheritance tax purposes before you die. So I think it's going to change stuff.
And gift the money from the annuities.
Potentially, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I think, and also because of that change to the IHT rules, people perhaps in their 40s and 50s who would have just kept shoveling money into pensions as an IHT shelter are perhaps now going to be more inclined to try and find other ways to pass the wealth on.
So, you know, the Chancellor was very clear that only a fraction of households, 6% maybe or whatever, pay inheritance tax on an annual basis. But this is because the largest asset outside of homes was sheltered. Yes. Do you think now we're going to see a big jump in the amount of households that have an inheritance tax bill?
I think it's going to go up for sure over time. And I can't give you a number on where it's going to go to. But I think in the meantime, it's going to change how people view their pension wealth, how they view pension saving, and how they draw down on their accumulated wealth in retirement.
My mom went, how do I give you the money without it being taxed? And I just went, just spend it, Mom. Like, spend your bloody pension. Do you know what I mean? And I know a lot of people would disagree with me on that basis, but I think, you know, I don't want my mom to think, you know, and they want to look after you, and I get that, and I've got a son and I want to look after him, but I also just want my mom to live a life, you know, and I hope this promotes her to like go a bit mental.
We did some research a couple of years ago looking at equity release. And the question was put to people in their 40s and 50s, how do you feel about your parents' generation drawing down, because it was in the context of equity release, drawing down on the value of their house to supplement their retirement incomes before they die, bearing in mind that's your inheritance. And what was interesting is that there was an overwhelming response in favour of the parents drawing the money and, you know, don't worry about my inheritance. It'll be nice if I get anything, but in the meantime, you have my permission. Go and spend the money. Enjoy your retirement. Exactly what you just
life,
said.
Yeah. I mean, there is considerations around care, though, right? In terms of that's very expensive, and that's often what the house pays for. You know, the house gets sold essentially for care,
and that's still an unsolved problem.
Yeah.
And you know, really, we need some kind of backstop insurance scheme in place that says, you know, you will pay this much and no more if your care costs arise.
Okay, and then maybe you could say that element of the pension is you can access that for care without taxation.
Exactly.
And you say like everyone's lifetime care allowance for a basic level is maximum 100k or something, and if you want to go and live in the Bahamas, you can spend that, but even the bog standard stuff is super expensive, right? If you live too long.
Exactly. So the interaction of your housing wealth, your pension, your care system, it's all connected.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Because there's going to be a lot of this rolling down the hill over the next 10 to 20 years, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, the government's got a review of pensions going on at the moment, so I think things are going to keep changing and keep evolving for all the reasons we talked about. You know, there's this big picture stuff, a lot of money involved, a lot of pressures on the system. You know, there's a reason they're doing a pension review at the moment, because they know stuff needs to keep evolving.
Are you optimistic that they will improve the pension situation?
I think so. What's interesting is, it's a really good question. What's interesting is that their focus at the moment is on productive finance. It's on consolidating the pension system, ending it with fewer, bigger, better run pension schemes. And one, that's not a bad thing in its own right, because we'll drive more efficiency in the process. But also they want to do that because they then want the pension schemes to invest more in the UK economy and productive finance. And that's great if you're the government and you're trying to make the economy grow. It's not necessarily in the best interests of the pension scheme members who, for reasons we've already talked about, might prefer to have their money invested in a global index, for example. So there's that. That's the first phase of the pension review. The second phase of the pension review is to look at this question of adequacy. How can we tweak the dials, pull the levers to try and get to a point where more people are saving at a more appropriate rate for their retirement, and how can we help them do that?
You spoke about that last time, actually, the smashing together of the pensions and saying that then we get these big pots, say like Canada, where we can buy infrastructure projects or whatever, rather than all these snouts in the trough was the exact word of all the mini trustees.
You know, there's still a lot of enthusiasm for that to happen.
A lot of snouts.
Yeah. So the pensions industry is really good at throwing logs on the tracks and making sure that the pigs never actually get taken off to market.
Yeah. So. Are they speaking to you? Are the government speaking to you?
I have conversations with people in the government. I've not spoken directly to the pensions minister about this, but
they should be speaking to you.
Thank you.
No, I think so. Every time I talk to you, we end up talking broadly about pensions, because I just think your view on the system is so amazing. But I just want to bring it back to the practical steps of the state pension. We've got to assume it's going to be there, but probably do assume it won't be there. It's kind of, you know, it depends, doesn't it, for us and for someone who's like 50. I would say you've got
a very high level of certainty, right?
For someone in their 20s and 30s, you'd be like,
it's a bit blurrier, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm to talk about someone in their 50s. I think there's a pretty high level of certainty that the trajectory won't change drastically from where we're at the moment. You have to do 35 years of national insurance contributions to qualify for the full state pension, which most people will achieve one way or another. Right, but if you haven't got 35 years of national insurance contributions, you can make that up, and that's a really good thing to do. It's really.
You think they should? They should pay that.
Absolutely.
Anyone at any age. After
your
your working career.
As you get towards the end of your working career, it's worth looking at that and saying, am I going to hit 35 years? If not, can I make up some years? So loosely, the numbers are: you pay a bit over £900 to buy an extra year of national insurance history for the state pension.
How much, sorry?
A bit over £900, right? And that buys you an extra 1/35 of your state pension, buying extra 1 year of state pension, and you have to do 35 years to get a full state pension. So extra 1/35 of the current level of state pension of £11,500 a year is a bit over £300. Right? So to pay £900, you're getting over £300 of additional retirement income from the state, which means you only actually need to live for about 3 years to get payback on that money. So if you're approaching retirement and you've got some gaps in your NI record, it's worth buying the extra years. And I think if you're in your 20s, it's a bit less certain, but there will still be some state welfare provision further down the line. And if there isn't, we've got bigger things to worry about.
How do you check how many years you have qualified for your state pension?
Really easy. You can do it online. You go to gov.uk. So, the government websites are actually pretty good these days. I really like the way they've designed these really nice, clean, simple web pages. So if you just search, check my national insurance record, you'll very quickly find your way to the website.
Bang in your national insurance number.
Exactly.
And then there you go.
Date of birth. And they'll come back and very quickly they can tell you what your national insurance record looks like.
Amazing. So employers' pensions, obviously, match contributions, maximise that.
Definitely.
Look to get out of the default funds if you can.
Or at least ask yourself, am I happy with this default fund? Do I feel it's the right one for me? And Damien's got his own opinion on whether it is the right one for you or not.
You might even call it an agenda. I'm pretty passionate about it. No, but I don't want to. I want to come back to that and say, being in the default's okay. It's okay. Like it's a fund, and it's better to be in it than not. And if you look at it and go, there'd be people listening to this where they're only just getting into investing, and then I'm saying, go make a fund choice that dictates your retirement. Nothing is permanent, and you've got lots of years. So just look at the default for a couple of years. Go and say, what is it? What's it doing? And then maybe just monitor it for a couple of years. And then in a few years, once you've built some experience, it's like, getting my son and going and telling him to cook a Sunday roast. And the first time he's ever stepped in the kitchen, he starts with a bit of beans on toast. Do you know what I mean? And we build from there. And I think...
But the important message is it's worth getting involved.
Yeah,
it's worth going into the kitchen.
Get in the kitchen.
You need to log on. You need to log on and know what it is, because your pension's going to be the most valuable thing probably you ever own. So engage with it. I think the things that I wanted to come back on again, the salary sacrifice point is really valuable. You need to go and ask your employer if they offer salary sacrifice. You also then want to look at relief at source. And if they're saying, yes, it's relief at source, and you're a higher rate taxpayer, can you claim some money back? If you're self-employed, try and pay some money into a pension on a regular basis. Would that be a SIPP product?
It doesn't have to be, but yeah, I mean, a SIPP gives you the most investment choices. A personal pension,
LISA.
Lifetime ISA, yeah, look at the lifetime ISA as well. Think about maybe a bit of both. Think about what balance works best for you.
Yeah, and if you're a limited company director, there's loads of benefits there. So get your head around those. And then how often do you think people should be reviewing their pension and making...
Depends what investment choices you've made. So I'd say for everybody, at least once a year. We talked about if you made some racy investment choices, then maybe a lot more frequently. So I think investment choices should be an influence in how often you look at your pensions and monitor the performance of them. But I would suggest at least once a year, just take a step back. What's changed in my life? How much am I earning? What around my circumstances have changed? How's my pension performing? Get an updated projection, because I said, the assumptions will all be wrong. So just keep updating them. And it's like a guided missile that keeps missing and correcting, and eventually it hits its target, right? So you have to keep correcting course as you go along.
Okay. And I asked you a question last time, and I want to ask a similar question. Are you optimistic about the future of pensions in the UK and the ability for working people to retire comfortably and well, maybe like their parents did?
I'm reasonably optimistic. I think a lot of the tools are available to us. I think a lot depends on economic growth and how well the economy as a whole prospers. Back to your point about investing outside the UK, hedge your bets. Don't just invest in the UK economy, invest in the global economy. But yeah, the tools are there. I think it's going to get harder. I think the generation immediately before me, the baby boomers, who all retired with those generous final salary pensions, they had the best of it, right? Gen X a bit less so. So there's more challenges further down the line, but I think there's also more opportunities and more ways you can save for retirement. So I'm more optimistic, but I would absolutely encourage, to echo your messages. You need to kind of get involved and think about it for yourself. It won't happen by accident.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. So sorting out your pensions is one of what we think are the 6 steps to sorting out your finances. We've outlined what the others are in detail and what you need to do in a newsletter series, and you can access that below in the description. Got anything to add to Maine? Didn't think so.